Well, there was a question earlier.
Oh, yes.
They had to leave, but they were asking what the Ornish.
Ornish.
I'm sorry, yes, what that was.
Okay. So Dean Ornish is a person. He started, well, his story is actually quite interesting. He started at Rice as an undergraduate student, got depressed and suicidal, dropped out of school, saw a psychiatrist, got his depression under control. His sister knew the guy that opened Woodstock. I never can remember the name.
Saturnine.
That guy. And so this is the 70s, and he helped get him sort of back on track. Came to Austin, finished undergraduate at UT, and then went to Baylor Medical School in Houston for medical training. Went to Harvard for fellowship or training, further training. And so, in the path of that, though, he did research on these very topics that we were discussing. So he put a stay on medical school for a while, and he did some research, and then he did the same thing after when he was done with medical school. And in his training, he took time out and went to do research. And he apparently was very good at raising money, because he was able to do things that are really quite remarkable, even from this perspective at that age. But he was very interested in cardiovascular disease, and he was also interested in the things that he learned about himself with his depression and suicidal tendencies and so forth. So he got some wealthy people in Houston as well as elsewhere to give him a lot of money to do research. And so in the process of that, he created this program, which he started when he was a medical student. He took a bunch of people that Cooley and DeBakey in Houston would not operate on. They were too sick to operate on, which is really pretty sick. And he took them and put them in a hotel where they were a controlled environment for a month, fed them a vegan diet, no fat, no oil, and did pre and post intervention studies on them, and showed that a lot of them got better just in a month, and that their angina was markedly diminished and so forth. So they were actually getting better. So he did that in medical school and continued on that path, and ultimately formed what he called the Ornish Program, which is a research facility out in San Francisco Bay Area. But he really settled on those four pillars, he calls them, of his program, which is you got to be on a healthy diet, because nothing else. You'll see a lot of people that say, well, he looks healthy, but he's in my cath lab getting heart cath and so forth. You have to have a healthy, basically what we call a whole food plant-based diet, which means no processed foods, no animal products at all, only plants as they come off the tree or out of the ground or out of the garden. It should be whole food plant-based diets. And no oil. And then beyond that, exercise, which is whatever people can do on a consistent basis, group support, because of the social support issues that we all have as human beings and so forth, has been described earlier, and stress management. And stress management was yoga, I think, because of the contact that his sister had put him in when he was in medical school trying to figure out what to do with his depression. And so that program is paid for, one of the 3 programs in the country that's paid for by CMS as considered as intensive cardiac rehab. But you have to have all those four parts of the program, otherwise CMS won't pay for it. So it's he's been very active in this whole field, really his whole career. And he's still publishing, he's got a website, which everybody's got a website. But if you're interested in that program, that's the most sort of cohesive program that's out there that does all the things that we were talking about.
I think in regards to the diet, there is a lot of pushback with a lot of people that are big fans of different oils. And the thing to keep in mind is there are a lot of oils that have a lot of benefits. And the Dean Ornish program is specifically about reversing heart disease. These are people that are in serious trouble. And so I think even Dean Ornish says, you know, once you get everything, once you're healthy, you can probably maintain health with a less rigid diet.
So he liberalized his program. You can have 7 nuts, like 7 almonds or something. I I mean, it's like you can have just a little bit because there is some data that would suggest that's true, but you can't just slather everything with olive oil or any other oil of your choice. It really does. It really does block vasodilation very clearly. Yeah. There's a movie that's come out just recently called The Game Changers. I'd recommend everybody see it. There are a lot of movies about health and diet and so forth. It was put together. I guess it was released last month for general public. The Game Changers, and the guy that put it together is a mixed martial arts guy who totally trashed both of his knees in a fight. And so he was in a wheelchair, and then they had both his knees operated on, and then he had to recover. And so he decided, doing a lot of research on his own, that he should go on a plant-based diet in order to regain his strength and his stamina, which is obviously what those guys have to have, right? You got to be able to outlast the other guy. And so he did that, and then he started looking around. This was like in 2010 or 2011, and then he started talking to all these people. So a lot of people in this business, he interviewed all of them and put together this movie. There's a humorous part in there that the Tennessee Titans football team, 15 of their players are vegan on plant-based diet. And they look pretty strong, they do pretty well, and they have amazing stamina, which is really a big part of any kind of sport. But they took 3 of those guys, young men, football players, and showed them by using either a plant-based diet, no oil, plant-based diet with oil, that everything about erection was different. And so it's funny because he's got these 3 football players with a urologist who did all this tumescent testing on these guys to show, and they're all really kind of embarrassed because they're kind of like, they're filming this, oh my God. But he did that work, and it's in that movie, how we don't really think about it, but it's true that 6 hours is sort of the period of time after having oil in your diet that your arteries are totally fine in terms of how they vasodilate relative to normal. So it's a funny movie. It's a good movie. It's well done. It's got a lot in it. That one little vignette is really about oil and vasodilation. So anyway, see you.
And to answer your question, I think you brought this up when you were speaking about the length of time that they're fasted. Usually it's 8 to 12 hours prior to the FMD test.
Well, then that would be significant enough time. As long as they weren't cheating on breakfast or something.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
Stefan, you had a question?
Yeah, probably for Dr. Hunter first. First of all, thanks for all the information everybody shares. Great. Caffeine, I haven't heard anybody talk today about coffee and or caffeine consumption and its impact on heart health. Care to comment on whether it's in your research?
That one's for me.
I'll take that. You go ahead.
You can, well, I just, aside from the fact that we certainly control for it, I mean, they can't have caffeine at least 12 hours before the testing, the vascular measures that we do, because it can impact vascular function. And I'm going to give it over to our cardiologist.
Yeah, so you got to, like a lot of the food industry studies, they're paid for by industry, so you have to be careful about what you're reading on the front page. That, you know, Time Magazine a year or two ago was butter's back or whatever. Everybody's put butter on everything, paid for by the dairy industry. And there's a lot of stuff in the coffee world that's been paid for by the coffee industry. So you have to look all the way through and find the finest print at the end to say what the deal is. There's no data, as far as I'm aware, that says that a cup or two of coffee a day, which is not a massive container, but is, you know, a cup of coffee, like one would generally think of, 8 or 10 ounces of coffee that's not, not really super strong, like espresso, that causes any particular problem in our heart patients. It does raise heart rate. It does cause a bit of vasodilation. It's an adrenergic type of drug or compound, and so it gets, you know, it's like getting a little jolt of adrenaline is how you feel, how it feels to you. Kind of wakes up and you're ready for fight or flight kind of deal. I tell my patients 2 cups a day, that's it. I don't abide by that myself, but I'm not a patient, so. Yeah. So, if you read what's in the press day to day, I mean, it changes all over the place, depending on who's paid for the study.
I
So, in other studies, why are the people doing yoga 3 times a week? I think most
Yeah.
people in this room probably would be like maybe 5 times a week. You know, like it's not
Well,
super
I don't practice
active.
5 times a week, let me just go ahead and put that out there.
But it's, to me, it's not a super active person. It's like a little bit active from nothing.
Yeah, but
which
these
maybe
people
makes
are
them-
sedentary for 6 months when they sign up for this. So asking somebody to do a 90-minute class 3 times a week, and they've been doing practically nothing at all, that is pretty strenuous for them in terms of like the vigor of the intervention. So yeah, I think it is considered
It would be
difficult
interesting to
for
see a
some.
study for a little bit more even active people. You know, like what are the results
Yes.
actually? Because a lot of people basically,
Absolutely.
in my experience, almost become addicted to the practice, whether
Yeah.
they have other addictions or not. So it would be interesting to see whether there's like as much as too much or too little or
Yeah.
optimal amount.
Agreed. I certainly do agree with you on that. And usually the frequency of the interventions are usually anywhere from 2 to 5 times a week. The only study that I'm aware of in terms of vascular function was the one that I mentioned during the presentation where they had them practicing like 6 times a week.
Is that the one in India?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it's the only study to show any reduction in arterial stiffness. And that particular group, they're over the age of 60 or 65, and they also had hypertension. So they weren't necessarily healthy individuals too, so that could have made a difference.
I'd like to ask a question about, and directed to Dr. Hunter and also Dr. Watkins about, I know your latest study is with the hypertension study. You said people with a systolic blood pressure over 120 are also then going to be considered for the study as well. So it seems like there's a shift in understanding what that level is for hypertension. So what are some of the, both of your opinions about where hypertension is diagnosed? Or how high? Or how low? I don't know.
You have to take that?
I'll take that. So, we didn't used to know what was normal blood pressure. It was in the 40s that we first had blood pressure medicine. So before that, put them in bed, put them in the bathtub, calm them down and so forth. There was no medication. So since then, they've sort of figured out, well, 140 over 90 kind of became the standard. Above that's abnormal, and below that's normal. And the reason for that, for choosing that, is on the original studies, it was at that level of blood pressure that the stroke risk started to go up in people with blood pressures higher than that and stayed relatively flat in people that were at or below that level. So they picked that number and said, well, that must be normal. And so we've used that number for, I don't know, 25 years or something. But in recent, these two lines diverge. So people started looking at, well, what happens in that group of people? They have a higher stroke risk than the baseline, so should we do something about that? And so over time, normal has been whittled down to 120 over 70, basically, as the appropriate level to get to if you can in patients. Now, when you're old and have stiff pipes, you're not going to be able to tolerate that unless we very, very, very slowly get you down there, because it takes a lot of adjustment of all sorts of things physiologically to account for having that low blood pressure. But generally speaking, that's where the most recent guidelines have been, is 120 or below is normal and above that's not normal. There are a lot of people that still argue about that, but it's, it is the safest place to be if you can get there, I guess is the message.
And it made so many people hypertensive overnight, really, when they came out with those guidelines. I mean, it increased the numbers by millions, the prevalence rates when they came out with those revised.
With that guidance, what percentage of people would then be considered? How did that change? What percentage of the population would then be considered hypertensive?
Gosh, I can't give you that number, but it's a lot more than it used to be.
Yeah.
It's over 100 million, I know. I don't know the exact percentage. Because, I mean, you really, 122 over 80 is considered hypertensive now. So, yeah, just imagine that. Anything above 80 in terms of your diastolic blood pressure is considered hypertensive. That's something that needs to be corrected.
One area where we're making progress, but we're slow in, And if you asked an Ayurvedic practitioner that, they would say, well, it depends on the individual, what their blood pressure should be. And there's certain types of people that are optimally functional at a higher blood pressure than others. And Western science is real hard to study that. You know, where do you get the funding to study individuals? And we're driven by research, and the money goes to the researchers that you can replicate.
You had a question?
Oh, it's me? Okay, cool. Yeah, speaking of the individual, I just want to make that extra proposal that when we're doing like these studies, like really go into some of these communities, like these underserved and underprivileged communities, in particular like the Black and brown communities that don't have the access to yoga. So when we talk about yoga and doing these studies, and also too filling out this form, I just feel like there's a lot of different people in specific communities that have different diets. Obviously, high blood pressure is prevalent in those communities as well. And I'm not sure how these studies affect certain demographics, but I would just make a proposal to actually go out into those communities and do that research to see how that would affect or not affect these numbers here. And yeah, because when we think about yoga, by and large, I think maybe you said, one of y'all said that by and large it's mostly women in there. So maybe do some studies with men as well.
White female, college educated people who tend to make more money. I mean, that's pretty much the standard yoga practitioner.
Well, there's a lot of the research money goes into that population.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a challenge to get these practices studied. But Boston Medical does a lot of work in that area. Bob Saper's doing a great job trying to do that kind of work especially with yoga and the underserved. But it's hard to get people. It's hard to get the money for it, and it's hard to get the practitioners.
Mm.
Yeah, you need money to do the research, right?
Yeah.
But then you kind of you need research to get money too. So it's like you kind of have this catch-22. And the way at least with the way my trials are designed, I mean, people had to at least come up with $150 just to participate. I mean, it's better now because with the hypertension study, they actually get it for free. So there is no money out of pocket, so, which is a good thing.
I just had a comment because, like, I know the statistics on the ethnicity, gender, but a lot of it depends whether you have a yoga studio in the community. You know, because I was in Boise, Idaho, and I was the only female in every single class, and every guy was like a straight guy, muscular, the hunters, the hikers, and all this stuff. So part of it is really access to the studio because no one's going to be going to some other part of town generally.
I agree. It is a multifaceted issue. Yeah, I mean, their access in terms of location of the studio, but also, you know, culturally influenced opinions of the practice as well, which can vary by race as well as ethnicity too, and socioeconomic status.
And also too, in Austin per capita, it's second behind New York as far as the most yoga studios. In Austin, it's not this, right? Am I mistaken?
No, I think you're right.
Oh, okay, yeah. So, and when you think about like Austin, it's not like this. It's not like Houston to where it's like an hour to get to one place or another. So I think there's a huge advantage that we have to be able to go to any side of the highway. Let's just be honest. And actually do this research, especially with the amount of yoga studios that we have. And I just, like I said, this is just a proposal and something to think about.
Even in East Austin, most of the studios that I know anything about in East Austin, even there, the majority of people taking yoga are white.
Mm.
So I think it takes, you know, we are inspired by what our peers are doing and what our parents are doing. And so it's going to be, we need some role models within those communities to make it cool.
I'm one of them.
Yeah.
So,
we need more of that.
Yeah,
also, making it financially accessible, I think, is just equally important because paying a membership is like $100 a month.
Yeah. A good place to start might be to target some of the different junior high, elementary schools, and get yoga in there.
Yeah.
We're actually, I know you guys are doing stuff at recovery places. We're going to start a yoga therapy program with Peoples
Oh, wow.
So we'll be there. We're also doing yoga therapy with Sims. So for the musicians in town, they have some services. But it's hard. You know, you want it to be cheaper, but the yoga teachers don't make any money.
Yeah.
So you've got the problem in both directions.
Absolutely. And that's great. That's Rich Goldstein from Yogi Yoga. And also Stephanie, she can stand up. Stephanie also is in charge of the Pure Action programs, the community programs. We do it at the public libraries, Austin Public Libraries. So there are places to go and practice yoga, right? And I think, you know, we're all doing our best to try to bring it out there, but teachers still need to make more money, right? That's true.
Yeah, I think, and there's a lot of initiatives to make yoga accessible in the schools,
yes,
in the prisons, you know, wherever we can make it accessible. But it comes down to making lifestyle health practices available to the population is really hard. The way we fund healthcare in this country, it's just extraordinarily difficult. And I think a lot of the yoga community is trying many, many different ways. I think, and the research is critical, right? Because unless we have the research, we can't get into the publicly funded environment at all. But getting the research done requires dollars. And then once you've got the research, you know, we don't need any more research on plant-based diets. To know people should do them. Getting them to do plant-based diets is very, very difficult. So it's going to take all of us kind of working together to make a change happen.
So in relation to plant-based diets, though, I think there is more than just personal health that is about. I didn't really think about that much until I got involved in it more directly. But there are huge issues that are facing the planet that have to do with plant-based nutrition as compared to animal-based nutrition. So we have the environment to be concerned about, and whether we are going to have enough food to really feed people if we keep going in this way. Greenhouse gases and all the rest are warming the planet, and those are real, and they're directly connected. What you eat is directly connected to all of that. And we as a society, we have been, in my view, taken over by the same people that ran the tobacco industry, or run the same type of people. Their same MO is what is driving the food industry. So if they can make something that's sweet, salty, crunchy, and fatty or oily, we'll eat it until we're dead, right? It is an addiction process. It totally is. So that's what they've been able to do in the last 50 years, is really radically change our food system. And it's totally different. When I was a kid in high school, we were a bunch of skinny kids. And now you look at the high school annuals from where my kids are, they're all a bunch of big people. And it's totally different. Same genetic tree. It all has to do with food.
Yeah. I think yoga, sorry.
There's one book called Salt, Sugar, Fat. Came out several years ago. What's the author's name I'm blanking on? It's about the food industry since World War II. And having been born not too long after World War II, I lived all of that, and I know what it's all about. But it's a scary thing. People ought to read it. Yeah. Salt, sugar, fat. Salt, sugar, fat, and crunch is really it's crunchy. We'll eat it, right?
Yeah. I think one of the problems we have with addiction studies is a lot of it goes back to one study with rats where they're given a choice between food and drugs. And the rats would starve themselves to death going for the drugs, you know. And just recently a researcher went back and says, well, we're comparing a rat in a cage. Says, what if we created a cage that was like Disney World for rats? So he did the exact same study, but he put in other rats and wheels and tunnels and made just rat heaven. And the rats went for the food. And so I think the other half of this equation, when we're trying to get people to change their lifestyles, you know, if we're living in rat cages and our life is a rat cage, it's really hard to deal with addiction if we aren't addressing that side of it.
Right. Part of those studies that were done a long, long time ago were certain strains of rats that will drink alcohol to the exclusion of food and water until they're dead. Yeah. And other strains of rats, they ignore the alcohol and they eat the food and water. Yeah. So, but that's a good analogy.
Any other questions? Wow. Thank you.